He was more than a soldier's dog. He was a guardian, a silent protector with instincts that defied logic. But when Coda took his last breath in Sergeant Mason's arms, something strange was left behind. A whisper caught on tape that no one could explain. Was it a glitch, or was Coda trying to say one last word from beyond? If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's jump into the story. The rain fell in a steady rhythm on the tin roof of the base clinic, soft but certain, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something that couldn't be stopped. Inside the white-lit room, quiet as a chapel, Sergeant Mason Wyatt sat on the floor, his back against the wall and his arms wrapped around a bundle that meant more to him than most people ever would. Wrapped gently in a folded flag was Coda, a seasoned German shepherd and Mason's military K9 partner. His fur was dark and thick, now matted with dirt and blood from their final mission. His eyes blinked slowly, tired but calm. He wasn't in pain anymore, just tired. Mason knew what that meant. "Coda," he whispered, barely able to keep his voice steady. "You did good, buddy. Real good." Coda let out a soft sound, not a whimper, not quite a sigh, something in between. His breathing had slowed since they'd returned from the field 2 hours ago. He hadn't moved since they placed him on the table. Mason had refused to leave his side. He was still in uniform, boots muddy, his face streaked with dried rain and dust, but none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the dog in his arms, the one who had run into danger for him more times than he could count. Coda had been more than a dog. He was his shadow, his shield, his closest friend in the chaos of war. The clinic door opened quietly, and Dr. Nora Ellis stepped in. She had worked with the dogs on base for nearly 20 years, and had known Coda since his first day as a young, eager trainee. Her face was calm, though her eyes held the weight of having seen too many goodbyes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Mason didn't look up. He just kept stroking Coda's ears, the way he always did after every patrol. "You remember that night in Helmand?" he whispered to the dog. "You found that trap before anyone else. You saved them, Coda. All of them." Coda's ears twitched slightly, as if he remembered too. Just outside the room, Emma Wyatt, Mason's wife, sat on a bench with her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her heart ached, not just for Coda, but for what Mason was about to lose. Next, to her, their son Benji, only 10 years old, sat still, holding his father's old military cap with both hands. Coda was his hero. Every night Mason would tell him stories about the missions, about how Coda could sense danger before anyone else. Benji had believed Coda was part dog, part superhero. And now he sat there, trying not to cry, but failing. Inside, Mason lowered his head and pressed his forehead gently against Coda's. The dog's breath was faint now, shallow, slower each time. "I'm not ready," Mason whispered. "But thank you for everything." Dr. Ellis moved closer. Her hand rested gently on Mason's shoulder. The time had come. Coda let out one last exhale, warm and peaceful. His body relaxed completely, his eyes closing like a curtain falling at the end of a long, difficult show. And just like that, he was gone. Mason stayed there, motionless, holding the weight of more than just his dog. He was holding years of memories, of fear, of loyalty, and the kind of love that doesn't need words. His eyes burned, but he didn't blink. The room around him was too quiet, as if even the rain outside was mourning. It was Emma who had insisted that Coda wear the small voice recorder in his vest during missions. "You'll want to hear the sound someday," she had told Mason. "His breathing, your commands, something to hold on to." At the time, it seemed unnecessary. Now it felt like a lifeline. He reached into Coda's vest, hands shaking, and pulled it out. It was small, barely the size of a thumb drive, but heavy, with meaning. Mason didn't press play. Not yet. Not here. Later that night, after Coda had been taken with full honors to the base memorial wing, Mason sat alone in their quarters. The flag was folded neatly on the table. The room, once filled with Coda's steady breathing, now felt hollow. Still. Too still. Benji was asleep down the hall, clutching Coda's collar. Emma walked in with a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She sat beside him on the edge of the bed and placed a hand over his. "He's with the others now," she said quietly. "The ones who gave everything." Mason didn't answer right away. His hand curled tighter around the recorder. "He gave, more than most men ever do," he muttered. "He deserves more than heaven." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "You don't have to carry all of this alone." But Mason wasn't sure he could let go. Not yet. As the night deepened and the bass fell into silence, he finally lifted the recorder and pressed play. Static. Footsteps. A soft bark. His own voice giving a quiet command. Then, something strange. Just as the recording faded to silence, there was a whisper. Not words. Not a sound that should have been there, but something that sent a shiver through his spine. Mason sat frozen, heart pounding. What was that? And why did it feel like Coda was still trying to say something? The sun had not yet risen, but Sergeant Mason Wyatt was wide awake. He sat alone at the edge of his bunk, the small voice recorder in his hand. He had listened to it 3 times during the night, and every time, that strange sound at the end made his chest tighten. It wasn't just background noise, it wasn't wind. It was something else. A whisper. Low. Faint. Almost like a breath shaped into a word. But it couldn't be. Coda was gone. He stood up and walked to the small window. The sky was still dark, a deep blue just starting to lighten. The bass was quiet. Mason didn't like quiet anymore, not since the day Coda died in his arms. He had been through hard missions, seen friends fall, and heard explosions closer than he'd ever wanted. But nothing had prepared him for this silence. He needed answers, and he knew exactly who to ask. Later, that morning, Mason walked across the base to the veterinary office. The hall smelled of antiseptic and metal. He paused at the doorway of Dr. Nora Ellis's office. She looked up from her desk. "Couldn't sleep?" Mason shook his head and held up the recorder. "I need you to hear something." Without a word, she stood and led him into the exam room. He handed her the device. She plugged it into her laptop and brought up the waveform. As the recording played, the sound of distant footsteps, soft radio chatter, and Mason's calm commands filled the room, and then the sound. A quiet, strange whisper. Faint, but impossible to miss. Dr. Ellis's fingers froze on the keyboard. "You hear it too," Mason said. She nodded slowly. "Yes. I've never heard anything like that on one of these. Not from a dog, not even close." They listened again. This time she slowed down the playback and cleaned the audio. The whisper became clearer. It still wasn't a word, not yet, but it was something alive, something real. Could it be feedback? Mason asked, though he didn't believe it. "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's too shaped. It's not random. It's deliberate." They sat in silence for a moment. Then she turned to him. "There's something you should know, Doctor." Ellis pulled open a locked drawer and took out a thin file marked classified. She hesitated, then placed it on the table. "Coda was special. You know that. But he wasn't just trained for detection. Years ago, he was part of a trial program." Mason leaned in. "It was called Project Echo," she said. "The idea was to develop stronger emotional syncing between dogs and their handlers. Not just loyalty, deeper, intuition, instinct, the ability to sense danger, to respond to emotion. The results were strange, even unsettling. Dogs like Coda showed signs of reacting to things before they happened, but the project was shut down after too many unknowns." Mason stared at her. "You're telling me he could predict things?" "I'm saying he felt them. Felt you." even before you spoke, even when you were far away. Mason thought back to the missions, the way Coda would stop in his tracks just seconds before an ambush, the way he'd growl at certain places, certain people, as if he knew something others didn't. Dr. Ellis opened another drawer and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I kept this," she said. It was in Coda's old training bag. Inside was a flash drive. No label, just clean metal and silence. "Plug it in when you're ready," she said softly. "And be prepared." Back in his quarters, Mason sat at his desk, staring at the flash drive. What would it hold? Training logs, audio, something stranger? He slid it into his laptop and opened the only folder inside. It was named, "For Wyatt." His breath caught. There were 6 files, all videos, each dated over the last 3 years. He opened the first one. On screen, a dusty training camp came into view. Sitting under a canvas tent was a man in uniform, sweat on his brow, a tired smile on his face. "This is Rafael Cruz," the man said, looking into the camera. "And if you're watching this, it means Coda outlived me." Mason's stomach tightened. Rafael had been Coda's first handler. They had served together before Coda was reassigned to Mason. "I recorded this," Rafael said, "because Coda's not like the others. He's seen things, felt things. He's not just reacting to commands, he knows what's coming." The next clips showed footage of Coda stopping short during a patrol. Seconds later, an IED exploded ahead of the unit. Another showed him barking toward a direction no one was looking, moments before gunfire rang out. "This isn't training," Rafael said in another video. "It's something else." Mason watched in silence. The 5th video ended with Rafael speaking directly to the camera. "If you hear something after he's gone, don't ignore it. He's not done. And neither are you." Mason leaned back in his chair, heart racing. That whisper wasn't random. It was intentional, but he wasn't prepared for what came next. The 6th and final video wouldn't play. It was corrupted. The screen flickered, then went black. But before it cut out completely, one word flashed across the screen in a rough digital font. Coordinates. Below it, a line of numbers. Mason stared at them. He recognized the location. It was an old military training ground, long since shut down, and it was where Coda had first been assigned. He copied the coordinates down. Whatever message Coda was trying to leave, it hadn't finished yet. And Mason wasn't about to stop now. The drive to the old training site took 5 hours. The sky grew darker the closer Sergeant Mason Wyatt got, as if the clouds themselves remembered what had happened there. The base had been shut down 3 years ago. Most people had forgotten it even existed. But not Mason. The coordinates from the flash drive had led him straight to it. The gate was rusted and hung open slightly. A crooked sign still read, "Pine Ridge Tactical Facility," though half the letters were chipped away. Weeds pushed through the pavement like nature had already begun taking back what war left behind. Mason parked his truck just inside and stepped out, his boots crunching the gravel. In his jacket pocket was Coda's collar, still heavy with meaning. He glanced around the silent buildings, most with broken windows or missing doors. The wind carried a chill that made his skin prickle. He wasn't alone. From the far end of the yard, a figure stepped into view. A woman, tall and bundled in a worn brown coat, walked slowly toward him. "You must be Mason," she said, voice quiet but steady. He nodded, unsure who she was. "I'm Hannah Dale," she said. "I trained Coda back when he first arrived here. I got a call from Dr. Ellis yesterday, said you'd be coming." Her eyes held something he recognized. Grief buried deep, but also curiosity. "You heard something, didn't you?" she asked. Mason nodded. "Something I can't explain." "You're not the first," Hannah said. "Come inside." They walked into what used to be the K9 operations building. The power was long gone, but sunlight filtered through the dusty windows. Hannah lit a lantern and placed it on a table covered with old training logs and faded maps. "This is where it started," she said. "Project Echo." Mason listened. closely as she explained. The program had begun with simple goals: create stronger bonds between dogs and soldiers. But the results had been strange. Some of the dogs picked up on emotional changes before their handlers even spoke. Others refused to enter buildings that turned out to be dangerous. And a few, like Coda, showed signs of something more. Like what? Mason asked. Like knowing things before they happened. Hannah led him to a back room filled with dusty files and an old projector. She loaded a reel and turned it on. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a younger Coda in training. In one scene, he stopped cold in the middle of a field, staring into the distance. Seconds later, an explosion rocked the far side of the training course. He was miles ahead of the rest, she said. But it scared people. They didn't understand it. They shut the program down before we could finish studying the bond. Mason sat in silence. It confirmed what he already knew in his gut. Coda hadn't just been smart. He'd been connected to something deeper. There's more, Hannah said. She reached into an old file cabinet and pulled out a weathered folder. Inside was a photo of Rafael Cruz, Coda's first handler, standing beside the dog in front of this very building. On the back was a handwritten note. He sees more than we do, don't ignore the signs. Mason's heart pounded. They returned to the main room, and Hannah pointed to the corner where Coda used to sleep. He'd lie there, for hours even when nothing was happening, almost like he was waiting for something. Mason knelt down and ran his fingers over the cracked floor. It was cold to the touch, but something felt off. He tapped gently along the wall and heard a hollow sound, a hidden panel. He pried it open, with a piece of broken metal nearby. Inside was a small metal box, dusty and worn. He opened it slowly. Inside was a USB drive, an envelope, and an old dog tag with Raphael's name on it. Mason's hands shook as he unfolded the envelope. The note inside was short. If you're reading this, it means Coda trusted you. There's more. Don't stop. Here. Back at his truck, Mason plugged the USB into his laptop. A single audio file appeared labeled Echo Protocol. He hit play. A woman's voice, clear and calm, filled the truck. This is Dr. Eliza Varnes, lead specialist for Echo Protocol. If you're hearing this, the subject, Coda, has passed. You are his final bonded operator. That means the connection has transferred. Mason leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel. These dogs were trained for more than obedience. Their instincts were shaped to sense emotional shifts, environmental threats, and, possibly, energy beyond measurable fields. The bond they form with their primary handler creates a feedback loop. What they feel, you feel, and in rare cases, what they leave behind may linger. The recording ended with a final line. You are now carrying his imprint. The rest is up to you. Mason sat in stunned silence. Coda hadn't just followed orders. He had passed something on, something invisible, but very real. As he drove away from the base, the sky began to clear. The road ahead was still long, but Mason felt something stir inside him, not pain, not fear, purpose. And somewhere in that quiet fog, he could almost hear it again, that whisper, a word, taking shape. 3 weeks had passed since Sergeant Mason Wyatt returned from the old Pine Ridge facility, but something inside him had changed. He couldn't quite explain it, not to his wife, Emma, or even to himself. The world hadn't shifted, but his understanding of it had. He kept Coda's collar beside his bed now. Every morning he picked it up like a ritual, letting the leather rest in his palm, remembering how it used to jingle with every movement. And at night, he played the whisper again, the one caught on that tiny recorder tucked into Coda's vest. Each time, it said the same thing. A word soft and warm. Home. He had spent hours trying to understand what it meant. Was Coda saying he was home? Was he trying to tell Mason to go home? Or maybe, just maybe, it meant Mason had always been home when he was with Coda. He still hadn't told anyone about the message from Dr. Eliza Varnes, or about the note hidden at Pine Ridge that had called him Coda's final bonded operator. It sounded strange, maybe even unbelievable. But Mason believed it now. He felt it every time he closed his eyes. Coda was gone, but not lost. One cool morning, Mason stood at the base's memorial garden. A new section had just been added. A quiet place beneath a line of oak trees where bronze statues of military dogs sat in silent tribute. In the center was a new figure, its eyes focused and its ears alert. A statue of Coda. Below it was a small plaque. One word carved into stone: home. Emma stood beside him, holding Benji's hand. The boy stepped forward slowly and placed Coda's old leash at the statue's base. Then he looked up at the figure. "Do you think he knows?" Benji asked. Mason knelt beside his son. His eyes were damp, but his voice was calm. "I think he's right here," he said, placing a hand over his heart. Watching it all, they stood there for a long time, no one speaking, just listening to the soft rustle of the trees above them. That afternoon, Mason made a decision. He had spent enough time looking back. Now, it was time to carry Coda's mission forward. With support from the base commander and Dr. Nora Ellis, Mason launched a new program, Project Echo, a rehabilitation and pairing initiative for retired military dogs and veterans recovering from trauma. The goal, Mason told a small group during the first meeting, isn't just healing dogs, it's healing people. These animals know pain, they also know how to carry it for us. Every day after that, Mason walked the training field with one of the new dogs at his side. Not to replace Coda, but to honor him. Each paw print in the dirt was a memory, a promise. One night, after a long day of training, Mason sat at his desk going through old files. He hadn't touched Caleb's letter in weeks, the one left by Coda's former squad leader. But something tugged at him, so he unfolded it again. At the bottom, written in Caleb's neat, shaky handwriting, was something Mason hadn't noticed before. A date, and next to it the word, delivery request, permanent reassignment. It was paperwork. But not just any paperwork. Caleb had planned to retire Coda early and send him to live with Mason. "He needs you more than the field does," the note read. "And I think you need him too." The request had never been processed. Lost in the shuffle, forgotten, but life had found a way anyway. Coda had stayed with Mason till the very end. Later that night, Mason sat on the front porch, staring up at the stars. The air was crisp and the base was quiet. In his lap was Coda's collar. At his feet, Asher, one of the new K9s from the program, rested with his head on Mason's boot. Inside, Benji was drawing. Earlier, he'd asked if he could make a picture of Coda in the sky. "Sure," Mason had told him. "Just make sure he's running, he always liked that." Out in the night, a breeze moved through the trees. It was quiet. Then just for a second, Mason felt it, like someone brushing past him. He looked around. Nothing. Just the wind. But deep in his chest, something settled. Not sadness. Not pain. Peace. Few months later, the trees in the memorial garden had turned gold and red. Autumn had arrived. Project Echo was thriving. Veterans smiled again. Dogs wagged their tails. The space had become more than a program. It had become a place of second chances. During a quiet ceremony, Mason stood at the small podium by Coda's statue. He didn't prepare a speech, he just spoke from the heart. "Coda wasn't just a partner," he said. "He was the piece of me I didn't know I was missing. He stood by me through every storm, and in the end, he gave me something I never expected." He paused, taking in the faces of those listening, soldiers, family, dog handlers, and a few who simply came to remember. He gave me a reason to keep going. As the bugle played the final note, Mason stepped back. Benji ran forward and placed one last gift at the statue's paws. A drawing. A shepherd in the clouds, tongue out, tail high. On it, in a child's handwriting, "You are my home." And as Mason turned to walk away, he heard it again, not in his ears, but in his heart. That quiet, steady whisper, "Home."